So, what is one piece or part of that stigma that you hope would change in the coming years when it comes to like South Asians and youth that are suffering from mental health?
Unknowingly been doing mental health related stuff probably since like early middle school. I think like the freshman year trial period is more than valid. And I think a lot of people do go through that.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the NextGen Podcast. My name is Meghna. I'm a senior at UCSD. Today's guest on the podcast is Astha Soni, a South Asian mental health advocate and blogger with over 5 years of experience. As a recent UC Davis graduate, she currently manages youth programs at NAMI Eastside, as well as mentoring mental health advocates and inspiring others to prioritize mental health and embrace their cultural identities. Thank you so much, Asta, for being with us today on the Next Gen podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we just like get like started with like the mental health questions, I just wanted to like learn more about like your journey into blogging. Like, was there something that you did prior to college that inspired you to follow this path, or and like something that you furthered in college?
Yeah. Um, it's kind of funny. I think I've been doing like unknowingly been doing mental health related stuff probably since like early middle school.
Uh-huh.
Um, before I knew that that's what it was, but I love to write in general. I always found like journaling and writing as like a way for me to put my feelings down. And I remember in middle school, I used to have this little whiteboard in my room, and it was like a way for me to organize my homework. And in the little corner of my whiteboard, I would write like daily little positive quotes for myself. And it was funny because my parents started actually like taking pictures of it and like posting it on their own social media, being like, oh, like look what my younger daughter wrote or whatever. And so initially it started off as like a little silly little thing, but even through their Facebook, a lot of like adults were commenting saying that, these are such good little reminders. And from then I kind of decided that, that was something I really wanted to do is like take small little like meaningful steps to make someone else's day brighter, remind them about, you know, that there's always better things to look forward to. And then that kind of led me to like start my blog in the beginning of high school, I want to say. Um, and I started off just treating it as like a journal and like just sharing like positive thoughts. And then from there, I kind of evolved and got more on the social media side, and then it evolved. And I think college gave me a lot of like new educational opportunities to learn about, how I can, what mental health is, first of all, and how I could take my little silly little blog, what started off, to be more meaningful and more impactful for people.
So you mentioned these like small little like quotes. Like, did you just like come up with them, or were they just like stuff that you like reminders for the day? Like, hey, like I want to be positive today, or like those type of things, or was there like a specific website?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you remember, this is very like middle school core, but I don't know if you remember like Tumblr and stuff.
Mhm.
That used to be a big thing. I think I would get those little like positive cringy quotes from Tumblr that were like, I don't even know what they were. It was like, don't be sad, like be happy. I didn't, it was like very like silly stuff like that.
Mhm.
So some of it would be stuff I found on Tumblr, on the internet, and then other times I would just like try and come up with something based on what I was feeling that day.
Okay. So have you, I know like you may like you don't have to like answer this, but have you like experienced anything to do with like mental health, like depression, anxiety, panic attacks, or that sort of a thing? And if you have, how has that like shaped writing and advocacy?
Yeah, I actually a lot of my high school time, I struggled with a lot of unhealthy eating habits.
Mhm.
And though I wasn't formally diagnosed with an eating disorder, that's like what I showed symptoms of the most in high school, and that really impacted my mental health. My eating habits actually stemmed from my poor mental health, and that was kind of something I had to battle for a lot of high school and into the beginning of college.
Mhm.
Um, especially because I started college during COVID. So that was kind of the time where I ended up relapsing a lot, and it was hard to stay on track. But I think from my experiences, it was hard to go through, and I think I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it or anyone to relate
Mhm.
to. And especially, like coming from a desi, like Indian household, it wasn't really something that my parents understood or knew how
Mhm.
to help me about either, because they were just never exposed to that kind of stuff because of the stigmatization in our culture. So I think it was something I definitely had to navigate on my own. But I think I found like small steps that worked for me, and just like little things I could do to make my eating habits a little bit more regulated, like change my mental health perspective a little bit more. It all just like it was a lot of small steps that came together to make a bigger impact over the years.
Okay, yeah, I can kind of actually like slightly relate to that. During like high school, I also was like battling with like mental health and just like I constantly had this like thing that I was never doing enough because I was always just comparing myself to others, and I think I still do that to this day. So I do feel like there's like different types of the mental health disorders, and I feel like everybody goes through it in a little bit too.
Oh yeah, I think it's almost like a typical high school experience now where everyone feels like they're just like they're doing so many things, but somehow all those things are still not
Mhm.
enough. I think it's
Yeah.
like, coming from I went to a like pretty competitive high school surrounded by a lot of like Indian Asian kids, and we all were just trying to fight each other about who was doing more
Mhm.
extracurriculars, who took more APs. And I think like even now, like my younger sister's in high school, and I'm seeing a lot of those things come up. And I know it impacts teenage mental health so much.
Mm-hmm. And you can't like open up that freely to anybody because you don't want to be like judged and like that sort of a thing. So it kind of makes it hard to open up as well. But I can
Yeah.
relate with the whole like high school and an Indian South Asian type thing. I went to Tesla STEM, so I got a lot of that too.
I've heard a lot about Tesla STEM.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you kind of were like battling with mental health like throughout like high school and the beginning of college. So how did you like manage those struggles while also managing academics?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was hard. It took a big hit on my academics because, when you're in this like mental health rut, I guess I would call it, I didn't like feel like I had the motivation to do a lot of things. I would honestly like sleep most of the day, and I felt just like drained. Like I felt like I was just doing things just to do them. So it it did impact, like it took a hit to my academics, but I think like I found little small ways to keep me going and keep me back on track. Like, I tried to get myself to prioritize taking breaks more often. Like, I would give myself like basically designated rot time and be like, okay, I have like 2 hours that I can, chill, take a mental health break, like do whatever I need to do. And then I'm going to start my work, or then I'm going to finish this assignment or whatever I had. And I think it was helpful to like have those breaks like scheduled into my schedule, especially while starting college. I'm one of those people that like rely on my Google Calendar like it's my entire
Mhm.
lifeline. So it was really helpful to like actually like physically put in times in my calendar of when I could take a break and when I could, sleep or catch up on things that I wanted to do and just rest. And I think that really helped me get back on track, because it one didn't make me feel burnt out because I was taking those breaks that I needed. And two, like it just gave me space to feel what I needed to feel, and like, okay, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to chill out and take a nap for like an hour and then get up and get back to your work? So I think that was really helpful for me.
I kind of do like a similar strategy in the sense like there's like one day of the week where I don't do anything related to academics. Like I don't even open Canvas on those days. Like I'm like not gonna like touch it at all. So it's like when I hang out with like friends, I go outside. So that's kind of like my mental health day. That's kind of what I call it. So I kind of like do like a similar strategy too.
No, and you really need those. I feel like
Mhm.
the more at first it was a little uncomfortable for me to like do that and be like, oh, I should not be sleeping right now. I have a lot of work to do. But I think sometimes you have to like force yourself to be like, no, I need this break because at the end of the day, like I think this was one of the biggest things I had to remind myself. But if you don't rest, you're not going to be moving. And like it's a very big balance of like, okay, yeah, you can keep moving, but if you're so tired, you're not, that productivity is not going to be to its full capacity. If you just took the 1 hour nap and then there you produce like 4 hours worth of work, you know? Like I think it's important to have that balance of, yeah, you do need a lot of time to do a lot of work, but you also need to give yourself that time to chill and relax.
Yeah, when I was in like high school, I used to feel like really guilty for taking that break because I'd be like, no, I should be doing like this assignment or I should be studying for like this midterm. And I'm like, no, I really need that break.
Yeah, for sure.
So, in terms of like blogging and like your mental health advocating, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? I know it's like kind of hard to predict that much in the future, but like what direction do you see your blog taking or like your advocating journey?
Yeah, I think college has given me a lot of like opportunities and experiences that I could have never like even imagined myself getting. And I think it made me realize that I have a lot of potential in my mental health journey. I just earlier, I guess I just didn't know how to make it happen or how to go out and reach for those opportunities. Um, but I think going forward, like I definitely want to continue my blog. I want to keep, being more consistent posting on social media. And um, I don't know if this is 5 to 10 years or maybe after that, but I eventually want to publish a book. Um, yeah. But I don't know when that's gonna happen, if that's even in the near future right now, but that's kind of one of the goals. And then um I like my career path, I guess. I want to go into psychiatry and really want to like bridge my career knowledge as a physician to like things that I already know about mental health advocacy. And I hope to reach a lot more communities, do a lot more public speaking so that I can, share my story with people, especially youth. And yeah, just kind of go from there.
I feel like being a fellow pre-med, bringing the aspect of mental health into just treating patients and addressing those issues are like very important and are still lacking.
Yeah.
Even
Oh, yeah. And I think like now, I think slowly society is starting to understand that there's a really big correlation between like your physical health and your mental health, and a lot of problems, a lot of chronic illnesses that can arise in your body might even be coming from your mental health and
Mhm.
vice versa. So I think that's something I would really want to focus on too, is, kind of bringing that aspect of mental health into the healthcare field.
Yeah, I feel like that's very important in today's world.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned like there's a lot of stigma with mental health in terms of the South Asian community. I've like faced it too. So how do you like address or like navigate these cultural barriers with your work?
Yeah, I think, well, I've interacted with a lot of like South Asian Indian youth, and I think like talking to a lot of teenagers, like they're always complaining about, like my parents don't understand me or they don't understand what I'm going through. And a lot of the times they'll like treat my mental health like it's nothing. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest narratives I see with, kids like and teens and youth our age, is that there's a really big gap between the older generation and our generation, specifically like in the Indian community. And I think a really big reason for that is like lack of education. I think our parents weren't like exposed to as much like mental health content as we are now. And I think, kids in high school now, like if you tell them you're going through a mental health crisis, like oftentimes kids will know what that means or what that looks like. But if you were to say that to an adult, like, or, like someone from our parents' generation, they might have a harder time understanding and replicate or resonating with that. And so I think like a really big part of it comes with bridging that gap and trying to explain to parents in a way that they would understand. And I think that's why oftentimes like it's very normal for a lot of teenagers to like disagree with their parents, right? Like I went through that phase too. But I
Mhm.
think as I grew older, I just realized that I was telling them something, or I was telling them about my mental health in a way that they didn't understand, even though they probably went through the same thing when they were kids. And so I found that a really, really like big way to kind of shift that is to talk to them about what you're going through in a way that they would understand, like in a way that's relatable to them. And oftentimes, I think we often overlook that our parents are like people too, and they've probably experienced a lot of the same things that we have, either now or when they're kids. And I think like now as I grow older, I realize that a lot of my habits and like things that impact my mental health like are similar to what my mom goes through or my dad goes through. And I'm like, hey, that's where that comes from. And so I think in terms of like breaking the stigma in South Asian cultures, I think a lot of it is like being able to talk to each other in a way that both parties understand, right? Like I think a reason that a lot of teens get frustrated is like, oh, they don't like understand what I'm going through. And my biggest response to that is, well, make them, right? Like, how can you change what you're saying to help them understand what you're going through and open up that conversation in a healthier way rather than like pinpointing or blaming your parents that they don't understand. Like, I'm
Mhm.
sure they're not doing it on purpose, that they don't want to understand what you're going through. I think things just need to be shifted in perspective for everyone to be on the same page.
Yeah, and I feel like when they were like our age, they may have like felt these same symptoms, but there was no like term for it.
Yeah.
And neither probably did their parents even understand this whole idea of like mental health, anxiety, depression,
Oh
all those
yeah.
type of things. Neither would they have understood that. So I feel like it might be getting better with each generation. Yeah.
I hope so. I hope our generation will be the ones that
Mhm.
when we become parents, we're a lot more understanding, a lot more graceful towards like ourselves and our kids about mental health. And you're right. Like I think a lot of the adults I've talked to, like uncles and aunties at like Indian parties and stuff, like I'll be talking to them about, whatever it is. Like I think one time I brought up like ADHD or something to a parent and they were like, "Oh, what's that?" And then as I was explaining it to them, they were like, I think I've struggled with that my entire life and only now am I realizing like that's what that's called. And they were like, "Really? Like this is a real thing?" And I was like, "Yeah, like you can get diagnosed for it too." And so I think that was really eye-opening that like they probably are going through the same things we are or face the same problems we are. It's just they were never given the same vocabulary to like label their feelings the same way we were.
Exactly. You mentioned that there were like some resources on campus that you found or like in your general community that you found like helpful. What were those and how did they help you with dealing with like mental health?
Yeah. Um, well, for me specifically on my campus, I was a part of the mental health initiative for UC Davis for all 4 years of school. And my last 3 years, I actually served on their board. So I think that was although it's a club, kind of like our main mission is to promote and foster like mental health awareness and education on campus and work towards ways that we can destigmatize that. Sorry, that's my dog. Um, but I think I learned a lot from my peers and from the work I did in the organization about, what do mental health resources on campus look like? How can students really benefit from things like that? Um, a lot of the times I think clubs and organizations that claim to do a lot of mental health work will often just like post data or like statistics and be like, did you know that 1 in 6 people like die by suicide every year, blah blah blah. And like while that's helpful to know data and statistics, I think like any normal like college student, if you walk up to them and you say like, "Hey, did you know that like this statistic about OCD or something like is not going to be as helpful as someone maybe even just checking in on them and being like, "Hey, like how are you feeling?" or um like, I noticed you've been really stressed lately. Did you know that there's this resource on our campus that you can go to? And that's kind of the work that I did and my team did on MHI is we're not trying to like shove mental health down their throat, but we're more so like giving people a shared community and a shared space to just come together, whether or not they get like a quote unquote like benefit from it, even if they just come and show up to an event where, they turned their phone off for an hour and like focused on their mental health.
Mhm.
Like to me, that's more of an impact than telling them a statistic maybe they already knew through like Google, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think that was really helpful for me to experience that in college.
And like all the college campuses, they have those like counselors, but like it's not really easy just to go in there, just walk in their do office and knock on their door and be like, "Hey, I need to like speak with you." Like it's not always that easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another thing that really helped me is I don't know about other campuses, but for us specifically, UC Davis offers like 5 free therapy sessions
Mhm.
to all students. So that was really nice. Like as someone that had never gone to therapy before, I like got to college and I was like, okay, free, like I'm gonna try this out. And that was a really, really unique experience for me.
Mhm.
Um, because I had never gone to therapy, but I had heard so much about it. And so that was really cool to experience that. And I'm grateful that it's like free for students
Mhm.
because even if you don't end up committing to long-term therapy, it's cool to go to even 1 or 2 appointments. You can see a lot of results and talk through a lot of things that you didn't think you could before.
Exactly. And it's a lot easier opening to like a third person when compared to like a friend or a family member, a relative, that type of thing. I think it's like a lot easier to just open up to like a third person that really doesn't like know your story. So
Yeah.
they're just like starting off with like a blank slate.
Yeah. There's no pressure for like there's no pressure for you to like be embarrassed or like
Mhm.
feel shy about what you're saying because that person doesn't know you.
Yeah, I actually like there's this like therapist here. I don't know if she's more like a therapist, but more like she just like handles a lot like bullying and I was bullied but in like freshman year by like roommates and that sort of thing. So I feel like even when I was like went to her, it was just like one session, but like I could see like a drastic change in just my behavior and how I handled it when I like opened up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry that happened to you.
yeah. What is like when you like started like your blogging like in middle school, what has like since then, what has been like the most rewarding part of this whole journey?
Hearing people's feedback. I think like even in middle school, like it's literally my mom and dad's like Facebook aunties and uncles like that encouraged me to even start my blog in the first place.
Mhm.
And like I didn't realize the impact that your words have on people, good and bad, right? But like for me, for my blog, it was so rewarding and heartwarming to see like kids my age, like either responding to me on Instagram, texting me, and being like, hey, I really needed to hear this today, or this is something I've been going through, and you like brought up something I didn't think about. And I think that's been my biggest motivation factor is to just know that like whether or not I'm releasing this elaborate blog post, even if it's like a small little Instagram thing, it's like I know that somewhere, somehow, it has a tiny bit of impact on someone. Or maybe that was a reminder that someone needed to hear today. And for me, that's more than enough of like any kind of satisfaction I could ask for from my blog. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know like being like vulnerable is like really hard. And so how do you really like when you go for these like therapy sessions that you like mentioned prior, how do you like strike the balance between like being vulnerable and sharing your like experiences while just like feeling safe, I guess, when it comes to like sharing your journey?
Yeah. I think what was helpful for me is well, first off, the I completed all 5 of the like the free therapy sessions and I had the same therapist throughout. So that was kind of nice in a way that like every time I met with someone, I didn't have to like restart my whole life story. We just kind of like built on each session. So that was kind of helpful. And the other thing is like the whole thing of them being like a third party, right? Is like I was like, okay, well, I guess I just won't be embarrassed because I would never see you anywhere else except for therapy.
Mhm.
And like, who are you gonna tell? Like, by law, you're not even allowed to tell anyone. So I think that was really reaffirming. Like, I basically trauma dumped to her every single session I had. Um, and yeah, I just thought it was really helpful um to be able to share everything I wanted without it being like censored or without me feeling bad that I was like opening up to someone a little too much or sharing too much information. And as far as being safe goes, like I think one, I really only told her what I needed help with.
Mhm.
So if there was like issues or some kind of like problems I had that I had already sorted through internally, I didn't feel the need to bring them up to her. I just kind of like shared what I needed help with. And that way, like you are in control of your own thoughts and the advice that you receive. Um, and I think that kind of contributes to the safe factor because you directly control how much or how little you share with someone.
Okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because when I was like going to those like sessions, like when I was like walking through the door, I was like, I don't know how much I really want to share, and I'm just like a really reserved person, like in by myself. So I'm like, how do I get past that?
Yeah. I think also like in my first couple of sessions, like I don't think I shared in depth that much, but
Mhm.
like they're trained in this, so they know how to like pick out different things to kind of like strike chords within you and think about things that you need to think about deeper. So even if I didn't necessarily know what to talk about or like how much to tell, I think like based on the little I gave my therapist, she was able to ask me follow-up questions. And then I would be like, oh, well, that makes me think of this time or this instance. And then we kind of built on from there.
Okay. So what advice would you give to South Asian students or like young professionals who are also like struggling with like mental health?
Um, that's a good question. Um, to take it slow, I think like one of the biggest mistakes or things I wish I could change about my college experience is I wish I'm a very like ambitious person, I think.
Mhm.
And I sometimes struggle with saying no or setting boundaries for myself. And so I would kind of like want to do everything everywhere all at once. And like I was like, yeah, in my freshman year, like, sure, I want to be in 13 different clubs and do this and do that and go to school and be pre-med. Like it was just a lot. And I think like that often takes a really big hit on people's mental health because one, you get into that cycle of like toxic productivity and you feel like you need to be moving all the time and like doing something every second of every day. And then two, it just makes you have really unrealistic expectations for yourself. Um, I think coming out of college, like after I graduated, I had obviously less things on my plate. And so like for a while after graduating, I felt really bad about like, okay, why am I not doing all these things right now? And it made me realize that like I think I have this unrealistic pressure on myself that if I'm not handling 50 things at the same time, then I'm doing something wrong. And so that was like a little hard for me to unlearn and switch to. But I think that's my biggest advice is like go slow and pick the things that you want to do with intention. And
Mhm.
like, I think the whole phrase of like quality over quantity really, really matters in your life. And I think you don't need to be doing 50 things. I think if you can find 10 that make you truly happy or things that, give you happiness that help cater to your professional, personal goals, then that's what's worth doing, right? Like you don't need to have these things just to say that you're doing them. I think life is all about leading with intention. And I think that's the biggest advice I have.
I totally agree with that because I'm like that student too. Like I think in like sophomore and freshman year, I was like in 10 clubs and pre-med and like student council and just it was like too much. And then there was this like doctor that I worked for, and she's like, if you can't speak about whatever org that you were a part of for and hold that conversation for at least 5 minutes, then I don't think you want to be in that. You're just in it just to be in it. And I was like, wait, that's so true. So I was like, to like myself, I would just like keep like talking to myself about that org. And if I just couldn't, or if I just like had nothing else to add, I'd be like, okay, I'm cutting this off, I'm cutting that off. And I'm like, now it's like a lot more relaxed, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of went through that too. I think like freshman year, I started off with doing so many clubs and extracurriculars. And then by my senior year of college, I was like slowly dwindling over the years. And then by the time I graduated, I think I was only in like three or four clubs, and that was it. But those three or four clubs were things I could talk about for like 5+ minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And like those were things that even now, like I'm truly grateful to have been a part of. And I think they've given me so much experience and like joy.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's just like there's like so many options when you're doing like clubs and stuff that just like everything sounds interesting. So it's
Yeah.
really hard to like pick and choose.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you start college, it's a new experience altogether. And so
Hmm.
you're always like, okay, like I want to try this and I want to try that and I want to be a part of this club and I want to hang out with like this friend group and that friend group. And I think like that's totally valid and normal to want to experience so many new things when you're in a new environment. And that's okay to go through that your freshman year and then kind of start like cutting down as you go through more things and you realize what serves you and what doesn't. So I think like the freshman year trial period is more than valid. And I think a lot of
Hmm.
people do go through that. But over the time of your course, like I guess it's up to you to start cutting those things down and seeing what actually brings you joy and what will help you in your personal and professional future.
Hmm. So I know we've like talked a lot about like South Asian, like the cultural stigma and everything. So what is one piece or part of that stigma that you hope would change in the coming years when it comes to like South Asians and youth that are suffering from mental health?
I think one thing that I'm already seeing a little bit of, but one thing I hope that it continues is just talking, like talking about mental health. I think there's so many now coming up, there's so many like South Asian people that are talking about their mental health. And whether that be on like a public platform or they're just like going to their like family friend gathering and talking about it. Um, there's also like I know I've just recently started being a part of NAMI, but they have these things called like chai chats, which are like specifically catered to the South Asian community, and they're little focus groups where usually they'll have like a voice from the community share about mental health tips, and it's open to all members of the South Asian community. And I think like those kinds of conversations of just like whether or not we do something about it, we're just talking about it. I think that in itself is such a big step. And like I think that's what made a really big change in my life is once I just started like talking about it to my friends, to my parents especially. Um and the more I talked about it with them, they were like, "You know what? Like what you're telling me is actually like a real struggle." And maybe they find some similarity in that. And then we start talking about that kind of thing where when I was a kid, like I went through these things. And I think that is really, really going to set the future of how mental health in our community looks like. Is the more that we talk about it, the more that we open up about it, the more that our future generations are going to be likely to like combat these things like confidently.
Hmm. And I feel like just talking about it in general goes beyond just talking about stats because yes, it can make you feel like you're not alone, but I feel like the true aspect of it is like when you can actually open up to somebody about it.
Oh yeah. And I think like um another thing that I've kind of like noticed is a lot of Indian people or South Asian people in general will have their own ways of coping with mental health.
Mhm.
And whether that's something that we deem as like traditional or not, like for example, like I know our generation, when you ask them like what are steps you can take to fix your like improve your mental health, a lot of like our generation would be like therapy, right? But for when I asked this question to like the older generation, like even my parents, when I asked them this question, my mom was like, well, like pray, like go to the temple and or like I like to meditate. And so for me, that was a really big like realization point that like they don't always need to go to therapy or go through those like traditional mental health like curing things that the like I guess the Western culture has like presented to us. A lot of the times they have their own way of like coping and dealing with their mental health, you know?
Mm-hmm. So I know we've talked a lot about like the whole like coping strategies and all that stuff. So if you could recommend one self-care practice to like our general audience, what would that be and how has that personally helped you in your journey with dealing with mental health?
Hmm. I think a really big thing that helps me,
Mhm.
I think I kind of mentioned this in the beginning, is like journaling or writing down my thoughts. Um, I think it helped, like, even if I don't end up keeping it, like, sometimes I'll literally write stuff on a piece of paper on a sticky note and I'll like crumple it up and throw it away. And to me, that's almost like a way of me putting down my negative thoughts and throwing them away. Like,
Mhm.
to me, that's kind of what I tell myself. That's a really big way that's been helping me. Another thing is like practicing self-care often, and that's whatever you think it looks like. Um, and I think when people think of self-care, they think of like, oh, like a cutesy like bath bomb and like elaborate 30-step skincare routine and
Mhm.
and that's fine while that might be what your self-care looks like. But I think like everyone has something different, and I think finding what works for you, what allows you to take care of yourself is really important, and practicing that every day or like every 2 days, like giving yourself time to like do your skincare routine or whatever you like have a skincare have a self-care day, I think is really helpful.
Okay, yeah. Those are like some like just general stuff too. And just anything that just makes you like feel calm and content, I feel too.
Yeah. And I think another thing like that helps me a lot is I really love to clean,
Mm-hmm.
organize. I'm a really big organizer. So I think whenever I'm like feeling stressed out, that's kind of what I resort to is like stress cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
But like I didn't realize that's my way of like self-care is cleaning my space and taking like I think taking care of the space around me helps me take care of myself. So that's kind of one thing that brings me peace or calm.
I feel like it's kind of like you're decluttering your mind when you're just like
Yeah,
cleaning up something that is just.
exactly.
So, like, lastly, what is one mental health myth that you wish to debunk?
Ooh. Um, I think one mental health myth that I've heard a lot is that you have to be like at the very end point to be able to receive help. Or what that means is like you have to be like down in the trenches to like reach out for help or even talk about what you're going through.
Mhm.
And that's like very far from true, right? Like you can start, you don't even have to have been going through anything to be able to go to therapy, to practice self-care. Like these are things that you should be doing no matter where your mind is at. And mental health is never linear. So wherever, whether you're even good, like I think self-care is okay, great. Like you're in a good mood, but still practice self-care, still reaffirm those habits in yourself.
Mhm.
And you never have to be at like the end or breaking point of your mental health journey to be able to receive help. Like you can receive help even if you're doing fine. Like I know people that are have like perfectly worked through their traumas and are no longer like actively suffering from a mental illness, but like they still go to therapy every day or every week. And it that doesn't mean that something is wrong with them. That just means
Mhm.
that they're giving themselves the tools and the habits to be on a good track. And for if any reason their mental health again like plummets or they relapse or anything, they've already been showing up for themselves consistently to the point where if anything does happen, then you're right back on track. Like you know how to get yourself back up to where you used to be.
Mhm. I learned genuinely, Asta, I learned so much from this podcast. When I first like started this, I was literally like doing like research and I was just getting like the same old stats, like, hey, these many Americans suffer from mental health. these many South Asians. And I'm like, I want to go more deeper than that. And truly, I've actually learned a lot because I knew these like general stuff, like, self-care day, practicing self-care and that sort of thing. But actually, how to implement that with the daily schedule, I was really like struggling. And just like, even just adding that to the Google Calendar, I was like, that's a cool idea because I just never did. Whenever I was just like, I'm done, that would be like, that's my break right now. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
truly have learned a lot. Thank you so much, Asta.
Thank you so much. And like, I definitely have not got it mastered, but these are just, things that I've discovered along my way. I'm sure I'll learn more too.
And before we like end this podcast for our viewers on our website, which is www.venusinspired.org, there is like an advice column where you can like fill out the Google Forms. And all three of us on the exec board, me, Samyukta, and Vasudha, are currently in our early 20s and just navigating life in general. So we'll be happy to help you with anything like that, or even like just connect you with the right people as well. So if you are, or if you feel like you are suffering from mental health illnesses, please do fill out that form. Other than that, that's actually it for this podcast episode. Stay tuned for the next one.